Welcome to Leadership Reimagined, where game-changing conversations are reshaping the world of work. I'm Janice Ellig, the CEO and founder of Ellig Group, Executive Search Advisors, where we are reimagining search through our long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. On today's episode, Purposeful Power for Gender Parity, I am delighted to welcome a very special guest, Baroness Helena Morrisey, former CEO of an asset management firm, the founder of the 30% Club, a board director, and a member of parliament. Helena was CEO of Newton Investment Management for 15 years with oversight for nearly £50 billion. Her successful leadership placed her on the Fortune's list of the world's 50 greatest leaders in 2015, and the Financial Times in 2017 had her as Person of the Year at its Boldness and Business Awards Gala. Appointed CBE, Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 2012 for services to the UK business, she was also named Dame CBE at the Queen's 2017 Birthday Honors List for diversity in financial services. And this year, in 2020, she became a member of the House of Lords. Helen is also an author with her first book, A Good Time to Be a Girl. Don't Lean In, Change the System. A book I have certainly enjoyed and was described by Forbes as one of the 5 most empowering books for women in 2018. I met Helena shortly after she founded the 30% Club in 2010, when women on the FTSE 100 was only at 10%. The purpose of the 30% Club was to achieve a minimum of 30% females on boards. Remarkably, that target on the FTSE 100 was reached in 2018, and today she has helped to launch 11 30% Clubs globally. When you think Helena's list of accomplishments are done, think again. She is the mother of 9 children, 3 boys and 6 girls, and now has 2 grandchildren. She does not just juggle it all, she excels at it all. I am truly honored to welcome one of the most powerful, purposeful leaders I know, a great promoter of women and a friend, Baroness Helena Morrisey. Welcome, Helena, and thank you for taking time from your very busy schedule to join us today.
Well, thank you, Janice. I feel very honored and delighted to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yes, and I know you're over in London and I'm in New York City, but we're making this conversation happen. So I wanted to start with your own upbringing, your journey to where you are today and what got you here.
So I'm actually, and I think it's very important to say this, I'm actually from a very ordinary family. My parents are both teachers. My sister's a teacher. I just one sister. That wasn't the reason why I ended up having 9 children myself. But actually, I've realized that being ordinary in a way, at least how the world would see it, was also very special. It was a very, very loving family background. My parents gave me a huge amount of time, and I never had the sense there was anything I couldn't do. My gender certainly didn't come into play at all. I think my dad would have quite liked to have a boy, but he didn't make me sort of act as the son he never had. They were just very genuine about encouraging me, not pushing me, just encouraging me to do whatever I wanted to do and to the best of my ability. And I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Any influences along the way in that upbringing that propelled you into the financial services world?
So I'm afraid I actually fell really into the financial services world, really through meeting friends at university who had a much clearer sense of what they wanted to do than I did at the time. I actually studied philosophy at university, which I know anybody outside the UK finds this extraordinary, that then you can go and do a financial profession after doing philosophy. But anyway, I studied philosophy, and actually my friends mostly at the time were men. And that was just one of those things. Many of them were applying to the city. And one day, one of them said to me, you should apply. You'd be really good. He said, you like numbers, you like talking, which perhaps will come out in this program. You like writing, and you should give it a go. And I really didn't have a clue what I wanted to do, and so I applied. And with hindsight, one of the 2 people at my first interview, which was for Schroders, which at the time was very much a merchant bank, a British merchant bank, did obviously investment banking as well as investment management. It was a very grand setting. It was at Cambridge University College, and a man and a woman interviewed me. With hindsight, the woman had a very big influence on both how that conversation went and also, the excitement that I then felt when I was offered a role. And we haven't properly stayed in touch, but I ran into her at a cocktail party when we still had those sorts of things about a year ago. And I told her that, she had been my inspiration, and over just a half an hour conversation, but she showed me that it was very interesting work. She seemed to really enjoy what she was doing. And to someone who really wasn't clear at that stage, I didn't want to copy her exactly, but I just thought, okay, this could be for me. So I'm again very grateful to her, even if she didn't quite realize what a big influence she had on me at the time.
So, Helena, you have often been the only woman at the decision-making table. And from a podcast I did with Ron O'Hanley, the CEO and chair of State Street, he said he handpicked you to be CEO of Newton Asset Management, which was at the time owned as a subsidiary of Bank of New York Mellon. And he said he picked you not because you were a woman, but he is a big promoter of women at the table, but because you were really the very best leader. How did you survive and thrive in a male-dominated Wall Street world?
Well, that's very kind of Ron to say that, and I'm grateful that he gave me that opportunity. But I think, to be honest, one of the very important factors was the founder of Newton, Stuart Newton, really acting as a mentor to me. It wasn't a formal program, but soon after I joined Newton in a very junior capacity, my boss resigned. I don't think it was connected with me joining, but anyway, she resigned. And Stuart said, we'll put a bond guru, he said, a fixed income, whiz in her place. Don't worry about it, Helena. And I plucked up the courage to ask him, could I look after the portfolios? And he thought about it, and he generously, gave me a chance. But he said there was a condition attached, and that was that I had to go into his office every day and not report for duty. I had to tell him, what I'd been thinking, what I was doing, trades I was considering in the portfolios. And at the time, this meant that I was running all of Newton's fixed income money. And at the time, I didn't realize just how much of an opportunity that was, because he was such a terrific mentor, and he ended up being a very strong ally. He had my back. When somebody said, and I can say this even if somebody else can't, they were a bit questioning whether what was going on in my head when I announced yet another pregnancy. And I remember one guy saying, I can't believe she's pregnant again, which, as I say, fair dues. I don't criticize him for that. Stuart leapt to my defense and said, equally obviously, so that I would hear it, he said, don't worry, she comes back better each time. Now, that was not strictly true, I promise you. But the fact, just imagine how secure that made me feel. And what was great about Stuart was he taught me, he was so far ahead of his game, he taught me that diversity of thought, actually having multiple perspectives when you're trying to consider an investment idea, that was the key to coming up with the best answer. And so this wasn't about identity of that kind of diversity. This was very much about your experience, your background, what you brought to the table. And he said to me, point blank, he said, we want you for who you are. And that includes the fact that you're a working mother, that you have perhaps gone to a different type of school than some of the people. I went to a state school, and at the time, most of the people in UK fund management industry had gone to private school. And that was just so both advanced thinking of him, but it just made such a difference to how I was able to thrive, and also how I felt confident about bringing my own leadership style to the table. Just to give, the last thing I'd say on it, just to give a flavor of how unusual this was at the time, my competition for the type of funds I was running in London was with 5 guys, but they weren't all just men. They were all men called Paul. So, there was this slightly comical situation where I was not just the only woman, but I was the only person not called Paul whenever there was an investment seminar or an awards ceremony or something like that. But, that wonderful gift that Stuart gave me made me so conscious how important it is to have allies, to have mentors, to have sponsors. Frankly, I know there's a lot of discussion about which is best and so forth. I think if we just are not islands, we need each other, we need support, and we need encouragement. And it doesn't mean you're not leading, it doesn't mean you're not strong, but actually we all need the sounding board and someone to kind of be behind us at difficult times. And Stuart was there for me.
He was a Renaissance man, wasn't he? And then followed on top of that was Ron O'Hanley, who also backs you. And you're not the usual suspect for the role. You haven't gone to the private university. You are a working mother, but here they see you for what you are bringing. And Stuart says she comes back better. This is wonderful to propel and promote you and others who are really capable as leaders. And so Ron then put you in charge of Newton Asset Management.
And I have to say, and this whole topic of your great podcast, Janice, is obviously about reimagining leadership. the fact that I wasn't a conventional choice was probably part of why he picked me. I mean, I'm putting words into his mouth there, but I'm guessing, because I look back now, and although I wouldn't have described it like this at the time, my style of leadership was relatively, anyway, empathetic. I would seek to bring in people's views with me, definitely not command and control. And given the takeover that we had at the time, the acquisition of the firm by Mellon initially, and then it became obviously BNY Mellon, the company was obviously going through quite a lot of upheaval. And it just needed someone, I think the leader at the time needed to be someone who would spend a lot of time bringing people with them and not just say, look, this is a vision and this is what we're going to do. And I think these days, this was way back when, this is in 2001, nearly 20 years ago. And I think now, although it has happened very gradually, that is much more understood, that we need different leaders in different circumstances. And frankly, I think the world needs more feminine qualities in leadership. Men can have them too. But, and I know this is a very controversial subject, the second one gets into differences between men and women. So I'm not saying it's just women that can do this, but this idea of bringing people with you, of reaching out, of involving others in decision making, of having true diversity of thought before you make that big decision. I think that's critical.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. We're going to talk further. When you look back on all of your experiences in the corporate world, what propelled you then to be a game changer for women in the C-suite and in the boardroom, and then ultimately to found the 30% Club?
So I had an adverse experience in my first role. I had a fabulous time in New York working for Schroders. I went there at the start of my career after graduating. When I came back to London, I was the only woman in a team of 16. And soon after I had my first child, I was age 25. And I was at the same time eligible for the first promotion. And when I came back after my maternity leave, I was told I hadn't got the promotion. And when I asked why, what areas of my performance did I need to improve, my boss said, absolutely point blank, he said, well, there's no doubt over your performance, but there is some doubt over your commitment with a baby. Now, of course, no one would say that now. And I was taken aback. I was not expecting my gender to have anything to do with how far I could progress. But I suppose I'm grateful in a way that I knew where I stood. And that was obviously one of the big reasons why I left and joined Newton. So it kind of worked out in the end. But it did make me want to do something to prevent that happening to other women. And the more I was wised up to it, the more I could see. We're talking a long time ago. My eldest son is 29 now. So this is, nearly 3 decades ago. And at the time in the city and financial services in London, and I think New York from my very early experience, was very macho. There was a lot of sexism. There was a lot of banter, as people would put it. There was, borderline harassment. And then it evolved so that it was just more insidious, I think, in some ways, less overt. And, I really wanted to do something about that. And initially my efforts were very much within Newton, within BNY Mellon. With Ron O'Hanley's support and encouragement, I set up a women's network within BNY Mellon, within the EMEA region. And that was the basis of it. I just wanted to help other women get further faster than I had been able to do. And, just to also that allyship and mentoring had also obviously been a big experience for me. And I wanted women to know that a lot of the experiences that we have are very common and you're not alone.
Right. And so you had that sting because you had a child and they were questioning your commitment, you don't get that promotion. That stays with you. That propels you to do things for others, to say, this should not be happening. We need equity here. And you do go on to found the 30% Club in 2010, I believe. Tell us about that, the genesis of that. And, you were ahead of your time, truly ahead of your time. There was no playbook on this. Women were really not in boardrooms. But you made it happen. And so tell us about the genesis of the 30% Club, who worked with you on this, and any obstacles that you might have faced along the way with this.
So I have to admit, as is so often the case with things that turn out to be perhaps a surprising success, this was born out of failure, Janice, because the women's network that I set up at BNY Mellon was very popular. We had, great feedback on the events. They were mostly networking events, would have an inspirational speaker and so forth, but nothing was really changing around the numbers of women in senior roles. And in 2009, towards the end of that year, I was invited to speak at Goldman Sachs as part of their Diversity Week. And afterwards, there was a lunch, a smaller group of us, and we were talking, people from different sectors. I first met there Baroness Gowdy, who since helped me launch the 30% Club. Anyway, we all compared notes, and I realized that no one was getting anywhere on promoting women, really. And this wasn't because there weren't any women who were promotable. This was, as I thought about it, just because our efforts were off target. So I came away from that lunch, instead of, as I was about to give up on things before, instead I decided that I would, just read about how to make change happen. I would read about how organizations behave. I'd read about dynamic of behavior in teams and groups. And I just read everything I could get my hands on. And I came across a couple of things. One was an initiative set up by a male CEO of Deutsche Telekom at the time, which was targeting at least 30% women at all levels, because he said it was good for business results. And I also started realizing that, what we were doing wrong, what I was doing wrong, was women talking to women about women's issues. And I realized, as had happened in my personal career, when Stuart Newton had sort of shared his power in a way, that actually we needed the men who were very powerful, particularly the chairs of listed big companies, to not just support the idea of having more women on boards, but actually to champion this. And the opportunity, and the reason why, I have to say, sometimes it's good to be a bit lucky in life. The reason why this was the right moment for that was because in the aftermath of the financial crisis, perhaps particularly in the UK, there was a lot of reflection about groupthink, and Royal Bank of Scotland's board at the time of its ill-fated acquisition of ABN AMRO was very undiverse. And the regulators called this out. So there was this kind of perfect moment, really, to go to the chairs and to say, look, I can help you. Instead of me berating them, instead of me criticizing them for not having many women on their boards, if any, at the time, over 150 of the FTSE 350 boards were all male. And instead of criticizing them, I said, we can help you with this. We can help you find the women. We can show the marketplace that you're serious about this. And you just asked about were there any setbacks. I have to say, even though it seems so obvious to, especially when I sort of hear myself say it now, and I think, well, everyone did join in and so forth. At first, it was not very popular. Only 7 chairs agreed to support it at the beginning. Most were very antagonistic about it. They said, well, who are you to interfere with our boards? This is a women's issue, not a business issue. And that took some time. And to be honest, it wasn't something I could change. This was where the great sort of teamwork of the chairs could help, because they exerted peer pressure. And effectively, the choice was you either, look very like retro, dinosaur-like and not with the program here, or you join the 30% club and you show your intent. And amazingly, all these chairs ended up joining it and then doing something about it. I have to confess, Janice, I learned, perhaps I should have known this, that they were so hyper-competitive that they all then vied with each other to put as many women and the best women on their board. So then they all just, did it themselves. And many years afterwards, so Wynne Bischoff, who was one of the 2 founding chairs, and I were both up for an award, or both won an award in New York. And he stood on the stage and he said, Helena was very clever here because she just got us to do the work, which, that's fair enough. I did in a way, because they had to put the women on boards. They couldn't just sign up to it. But it created a movement, and it's given me a lot of hope. I'm not going to over-egg it. This was just women, mostly white women. This was just the boardroom. This was not broader diversity, and it did not help all women to fulfill their potential. But it was a start, and at the time, the most obvious place to start. So anyway, I'm happy that we are here, and we're at over 30%, actually 33% now across the 350.
Right. So you have a third of the FTSE 100 are at women representation on boards. That's quite dramatic results. In the U.S., we're about 28% of the S&P 500. So we have a long way to go. When you look at the social imbalances specifically for women, and you're a big proponent of women, you've been an asset management leader, a champion for financial well-being. What needs to change for women in terms of education, business opportunities, legislation? How do we accelerate it so that we don't have this imbalance?
So I'm not a real fan of legislation. I think that is, very much a last resort. And the reason is really because I think when you are doing something voluntarily, as the chairman did with the 30% club, then they felt they owned it. And that this was their choice, and they became much more invested in it than if someone just told them this is what you had to do. I do think every jurisdiction, every country has a somewhat different dynamic. And I think we can't just leave it to chance. This is the other thing, that today I think there's a sense of diversity fatigue when it comes to gender. And there's also been a sense that it's gone down quite a difficult route. I think I completely empathize with the whole Me Too movement and Time's Up and so forth. But obviously there's this tussle now, this sort of sense of, is it all about wokeness or is it all about business results? And so I actually feel we have to just keep at it, and we have to keep particularly having programs which encourage women to believe in themselves, and whether that's through mentoring or sponsorship. That is the thing that I've seen work well. And to be honest, more than the numbers of women on boards in the UK, the thing about 30% Club that I'm most pleased with really is that we have a very large, in fact, it's the largest such scheme in the world, cross-company mentoring scheme, where you have fantastic women, usually in their mid-career, being mentored by, well, half of the mentors are men. And what's great about this is it so often has been shown that it's just that little difference between, just not having anyone tell them that you can do it, or not having someone to discuss a career strategy, or just feeling the burden of looking after family. I mean, this, year has been very difficult for so many people, but particularly women who are juggling childcare with their careers. So just that difference of having someone who will, spend time with them, be generous with their time, has made a big impact on women just staying the course and feeling confident about applying for their next role. The other thing is cultural. I do think, relatedly to that, really, the men who are mentors have told me many, many times over that it's opened their eyes as to the issues that women in their own company must be facing, but perhaps wouldn't feel that it was that safe to say anything. And so I think just developing better understanding of our different perspectives and being a little bit patient, not just waiting, not being complacent, but just doing that encouragement is really what I see as the most dramatic thing ultimately, is just a bit of a slow burn.
Thank you, Helena. And now a quick reminder to our audience. You are listening to Purposeful Power for Gender Parity with Baroness Helena Morrisey, former CEO of Newton Asset Management and chair of the Diversity Project. The topics we cover, like today's, are all current, and a new topic with a new game changer is released on the third Thursday of every month. This is a great way to stay current on relevant issues happening around us. Now let's return to Baroness Helena Morrisey. So Helena, in 2018, you published your first book, A Good Time to Be a Girl, Don't Lean In, Change the System. I loved the book, and it got great reviews. And your use of girl is intentional, so you might want to comment on that. But you also say to women, play to your strengths. And I quote, if you're trying to get a seat at the table by leaning in, all the while suppressing what makes you, you, any success is going to be limited. So, Helena, what did you mean by that? And what prompted you to write this book?
I wanted to write the book because I felt that the narrative, and I'm a fan of what Sheryl Sandberg's done in terms of using her great platform to initially spark a global discussion about why women weren't getting so much to the top as they should. So this is not a criticism as such, but I just felt the narrative was very much about trying to fix the women and not about what they were leaning into. And I've really unlocked my own career when I stopped trying to be like a man, really, I suppose, pretend. I was never going to pass muster as a man, but just stopped trying to emulate them and stopped trying to be like them in terms of how I presented and how I, communicated and so forth, and how I dressed. Even in my first, few years, I think I actually wore a pinstripe trouser suit with big shoulders, But anyways, I realized that there was just this pressure being put on women to just work harder, lean into what was there. Whereas actually I felt at the very least we needed a balance of a bit of that, but also then what they were leaning into evolve, and to not be so rigid about the qualities that were the signs of success or the future success or leadership qualities. And that's why I just felt as well that so many women I had seen had, and why I said that particular thing was I felt that they were holding back from giving what was special about them because they felt that would not be successful, that they needed to fit in more than they needed to be authentic. And I just know myself that the more able I was to be authentic, and I did have that opportunity under Stuart Newton's leadership, but the more I was able to be authentic, the better I became at my job. The more opportunity I got given because I was getting to be a better presenter, I was better with clients. And I just thought, this is not something we're teaching women to do. We're telling them to be more assertive. We're giving them training about how to succeed in a man's world. So that was why I wrote this. I'm conscious that the word girl can seem, I think it's different in different countries. And I know in America, it might be a little bit more seen as perhaps demeaning, and it should have been a wonderful time to be a woman. That would have been my alliteration. But actually, I felt it was, the reason I used it was partly because I don't think this is finished business, of course. And I do think it's a good time to be a girl now with the future. I hope the half-life of change is accelerating. I do see that since the financial crisis. I do think, even though we wouldn't have ever wished it upon the world, something like the pandemic that we've been living through, shakes things up much more dramatically than we've been used to. And we're not seeing incremental change now. We're seeing leaps forward, or we can go backwards, and we have to make that choice. So the girl point was because this is women of the future.
Well, and State Street has Fearless Girl right down by Wall Street. So I think it's right in keeping with a good term. And I think as we get older, being called a girl is kind of nice. So I like it. But the messages in your book are really terrific. So now I wanted to turn to your rather large family, because you really you've excelled in the business world while managing to raise 9 children. And you were, say, 15 years as CEO of an asset management company. How did you do this? I know that many are curious. How did you make this happen? And successfully, you never left one behind on a vacation, I understand. So
no, the worst thing was both my husband and I arrived separately at a restaurant, pizza place. We were going for lunch, and we realized that we were missing somebody, so we had to dash home for that. But anyways, so I have to credit a lot to my husband, because when we had both have full-time careers, and he was a financial journalist. Actually, one of his last assignments was at Bloomberg. And when we're expecting our 4th child, we kind of said, how are we going to make this work? Because we were struggling with 3, just the logistics. And he at that stage wasn't enjoying particularly just the daily sort of grind. And he said he'd like to go freelance and try do some slightly more interesting work. So he volunteered to do that because he wanted to also spend more time with the family. And then as we continued to have children, obviously his opportunity for paid work somewhat diminished. But also, I suppose I do feel, so first of all, he has to take big credit for that. But when we were both working very hard, and, it was a juggling act all the time, I guess we still did try to prioritize family as a core part of, our lives. It wasn't that we were trying to squeeze the children in around the edges, which I think just doesn't work and it just isn't fair on anybody. Our lives probably, were the ones that rightly took a bit of a backseat at that stage in our lives, because we just didn't have time for anything else besides, running the family and doing our jobs. But, I definitely have come to see as I've got older, that there are very many different ways to make it work, but it does require openness and a proper discussion, and honest about how they feel about the part they are playing in the family life, as well as perhaps trying to juggle their careers. If you don't talk about it, this is the recipe for disaster, I think. And it shouldn't be assumed, obviously, that either partner is happy with the division of labor all the time and will always be. So that's my only bit of, I suppose, my helpful hint, if you call it that. But I'm sure lots of couples do talk all the time about this. But I have been surprised at just how many just say to me, well, we've never really discussed that. It's just assumed that I would do the lion's share. And
I understand you had a whiteboard too, that you would have a list of things. So you are a highly organized individual.
That whiteboard was only one day at a time. So, people said you must have some sort of vast spreadsheet. We did for the summer holidays because, that was the only way I could sort of make sure that people weren't spending 9 weeks, with nothing to do. But it was a day at a time, and it used to take about 4 goes to get it right. This academic year, we have dispensed with the whiteboard for the first time ever, because we just have 3 at school in London now. And, and that's kind of made me sad a bit.
It's interesting because you really do have a marvelous family. And I understand that your drive for success and your energy and your enthusiasm is cascaded down to your children. And one of them particularly is in the field of music, Flo Morrisey. Can you speak about what she's doing today?
Yeah, so Flo was the only one of our children to date anyway that hasn't gone off university, went to performing arts school, always was a singer. And she left school pretty young and had to deal with a record label and released her first album, I guess that might be now 3 or 4 years ago. And then a second one, which was a collaboration actually with an American artist, Matthew E. White, which I think was, both were critically acclaimed. It's quite tough in that business to really immediately be an overnight sensation. And she's carried on working on that. She's now actually a mother of two. So she's taken a little bit of time out and now got back into it. So watch out for some new music soon. In between times, her husband and her, he's also a musician, more established than she. His name's Benjamin Clementine, and he's a Mercury Prize winner from a few years back. And they've done some music together. And actually, last time I saw her perform was actually in Dublin, the 3 Arena there, which is a huge one, as a support act for David Byrne. So, I'm very proud of what they've been doing, but she has found it difficult to work at the same intensity with a young family. And I've encouraged her to, she's pretty young, to, focus on what she needs to focus on, and not to, you don't have to do everything all in the same order as I've done it, or in the same intensity. But our children, so far, no one's followed me into the city, although one of my daughters is trying to get into fund management. So I hope I haven't put any of them off. Clearly, I'm now feeling a sense of relief that one of them is trying to follow me in.
No, I hear from others that they're doing fine, and you and your husband are great role models for them. So we'll be looking for more music to come out of the family. Before we close, you do chair the Diversity Project. What is this initiative about?
So this is, the 30% Club was very narrow in terms of women and boards, but across all sectors, across all industries. The Diversity Project is just in the investment industry, but it's all dimensions of diversity. And what we're trying to do, anyone listening who's familiar with that industry globally will know that it is quite traditional, putting that kindly, and has been one of the last to change, really, in terms of progressing around more inclusion of just anybody outside the historically, traditional intake. And we have been working on this for about 4 years now. What's great about it is I can see for the first time really this year that there's a genuine depth and urgency and collaboration about the work. It's quite complex pulling it off, because obviously we're looking at ethnicity, we're looking at LGBT, we're looking at neurodiversity, disability, mental health issues. During the pandemic, we staged a lot of Ask Me Anything calls. And actually we had a strategy day for the end of 2020. We always look into what's going to happen next year, what are our themes. And everyone said, this is the year that it finally we realize why we need big diversity initiatives, and why this is, we moved from just treating it as a 30% Club, and she was a special interest, and now absolutely critical to be modern, forward-looking, reimagining how leaders are. So that's very exciting. And, we have 60 members from the largest, BlackRock and so forth, right the way through to very small firms. And we do a lot of things with partnership organizations. One of the things I learned through the 30% Club was collaboration is key. We're not trying to reinvent any wheels. If someone has got a brilliant thing going on women returners, then we partner. And that's helping us to finally accelerate progress.
So Helena, if you look 5 years, I don't even want to go to 10 years. If you look 5 years, 6 years down the road, what might the picture look like then, in terms of in the corporate world, in society? What do you see the changes to be? What would you like them to be? And in that, you might want to say some parting advice or words to our audience.
So I'd love it to be the case that we don't need these diversity initiatives anymore. I'd love it to be the case that we've kind of become, gender blind, color blind. We're evaluating people's contributions for what they are. I don't think that's probably achievable in 5 years, but I do think, again, we've got an opportunity. This also can be seen as a threat, but we have an opportunity to rewrite the rule book on how we work, how we measure performance, how we interact with each other because of what's happened over the pandemic. So what I'd like to leave listeners with, if I may, is a bit of a call to action, because I think what I discovered with the 30% Club was actually, and it wasn't just me doing it, obviously, but one person can make a difference. Each of us can make a bigger impact if we join together and sort of march in the same direction, and we build momentum together. So I'd just like to encourage everybody, particularly if you might feel that inequalities are widening because of the pandemic, or you feel, very isolated because that's the way we've been working this year, that actually it's down to us to make sure that we don't go backwards on the diversity and inclusion front, that each of us, we don't have to solve everything by ourselves, but we can help solve the whole if we effectively, metaphorically join hands and just decide we are going to create this different environment where people will be included, bringing their whole selves to whatever it is they're doing, and as I say, it's that spark of innovation we understand is created by all these different melting pot of ideas. And that's what we're looking for in our companies. So it's really just saying each of us can make the future happen, make that happen.
Helena Morrisey, you're absolutely right. It's individual and collective results can happen because we are in this together in the path forward. You have been such a great spokesperson for gender diversity, now diversity overall. You've been to the Women's Forum of New York Breakfast of Corporate Champions, where we honor those companies that are above the national average in the S&P 500 and Fortune 1000. I hope you'll come to the U.S. next November when we, again in 2021, and hopefully in person, will honor those companies who are really moving the needle forward specifically for women, women of color, and diversity overall. I want to thank you again so much for joining us today, sharing your extraordinary career experiences, talking about your personal life, your book. And you are now in Parliament, so I know you're going to be making changes there in the government in the UK. You were an extraordinary executive and friend, and I so appreciate you being on the program with us today. Thank you, Helena.
Well, thank you so much. That's very generous of you, Janice, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for having me on your show.
And thanks to our audience for tuning in to another game-changing conversation on Leadership Reimagined. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit our website at elligroup.com. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes of Leadership Reimagined, game-changing conversations released on the third Thursday of each month and available on my website. Thank you all for joining us today. And again, thank you, Baroness Helena Morrisey.